Okay, we're here with Chris Ponder. Can you state your name and the office that you're running for?
Sure. Chris Ponder, candidate for Judge of Tarrant County Probate Court number 1.
Okay. And Chris, why are you running for this office?
Well, I've begun my 15th year of the practice of law, almost entirely in the civil division of the district attorney's office. I have handled just about every type of case that you can think of. I've had jury trials in county courts of law, district courts, handled cases in every area of civil law, family courts, probate courts, district courts. I've had oral arguments before the Texas Supreme Court a couple of times, argued at the Fifth Circuit, handled a case at the U.S. Supreme Court, actually briefed a case there. But the most satisfying work I ever did was in the probate courts. Of all of my practice, that was the most satisfying because I felt it to be the most impactful. It was my years as the chief of the DA's mental health unit, overseeing the mental health commitment cases in the probate courts were the most meaningful years of my career and perhaps my life. The work I did with the families, with law enforcement, with the courts was amazing work. And I think the experience that I've had handling the mental health cases, overseeing the entire mental health commitment process, as well as the work, the guardianship work with Adult Protective Services, I believe positions me uniquely to serve on this bench given my experience.
Okay, and what do you believe is the proper role of government?
The proper role of government from a practical perspective is frankly to get out of the way. Now that's not necessarily, I'm deviating a bit from the judicial side, but as a citizen I think it's very much to stay out of the way. I've been very fortunate to work in county government to advise and represent county officials, elected officials, department heads, and I've seen up close officials that have adhered to that philosophy and those that have not. And I've seen it kind of from the inside as an attorney, not just representing individuals, but representing elected officials, those who are in the operating branch of government, who every day face those decisions on how to properly serve the people and what sort of role they have. And I think that has given me a perspective that a small government, limited government, hands-off approach is the most ideal.
Okay. And when and for what reason should state or local government be allowed to seize private property under eminent domain?
Well, eminent domain is it's an area that we don't have a lot of anymore in Tarrant County, and that was so the strict answer to your question is going to be for absolute public imperative, maybe beyond the limit of necessity, and it should be it's one of those powers because it infringes on individual liberties so heavily. It should be reserved for only the most extreme instances where it is necessary.
Okay. And is Texas in need of civil asset forfeiture reform?
I believe that it is. I think there are opportunities to address that legislatively. Given my position in the district attorney's office, I might be somewhat reluctant to opine on that. It's not an area that I do any work in. I've done some forfeiture cases relating to gambling. I had a reported Texas Supreme Court case regarding the gambling statute that had a forfeiture element to it. I think there are opportunities for those areas to be tightened and addressed in a way that protects individual liberty while also serving the law enforcement purpose.
What are the top 3 issues for your campaign?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think it's one of the top 3 issues for us as a society, and that is dealing with the plague of mental illness in our community. The probate courts have the exclusive jurisdiction over mental health cases. We now, our largest mental health hospitals are our jails. We are jailing the mentally ill at an incredibly high rate, and I believe that is a product of not fully utilizing the civil side of the mental health area. So that would be one. The other being, I think that the probate courts generally have been somewhat isolated from the rest of the county. The probate practitioners have sort of been at arm's length from the rest of the bar, the rest of the county. I think there's an opportunity here to bring it more into the mainstream, to throw the doors open a little bit, as it were, and shine some light on the things that are going on in there. I mean, the probate courts, and a lot of people don't realize this, the probate courts have an immense amount of power insofar as they can deprive you of your liberty by confining you involuntarily in a mental facility, and also can deprive you of your property through guardianship proceedings. It is absolutely imperative that we bring those 2 practices to light and that they be done very much out in the open. You know, we had around 5,000 mental health cases were filed in 2017 between the 2 courts. Each of those required a judge's signature on an order of protective custody to hold that individual. So it's an absolute imperative that we bring these issues out into the front, that the judge of this court is accountable, approachable, and is not doing things behind closed doors, as it were. So I think that's a second issue here of transparency with the court. The third is this is a court with a very large budget and a very large staff, different than the rest of the judiciary. I think this is an opportunity potentially to try to line up the 2 courts' processes to potentially increase efficiency. The 2 probate courts have not always worked in conjunction with each other, and I think this is an opportunity to maybe put the 2 courts in play to move in the same direction and create some efficiencies between the 2 courts to maybe address the very large budget and large staff that the court has.
Okay. What do you believe are the top 3 things that make you more qualified than your opponents?
Well, the first is going to be my experience in what I view as one of the most important things this court does, which is dealing with the mental health crisis. Having experience in this area is one thing. The work that I did overseeing the entire process of, in fact, redesigning how these cases are filed. At the time, historically, these were a minor part of what this court handled, and I think that there's unfortunately, some of the other candidates see this as a minor part of what the court does. It's now the largest number of cases that the probate court gets each year are the mental health cases. We had to redesign the system because we needed to be able, as the DA's office, had to absorb the ability to file these cases without adding budget, without adding staff. So we had to create efficiencies within the process. I oversaw that along with the county clerk's office and with the courts and the hospitals implementing that. So I think my knowledge within the system is a virtue. I've worked very closely with law enforcement to figure out ways in which we can improve the way that police officers, law enforcement agencies deal with the mentally ill, and ways that we can try to move some of these people who typically go through the criminal justice system who are mentally ill and get them into the civil side. So I think my close work with law enforcement and then the support I've gotten from law enforcement in this area, I think also distinguishes me. I think being somewhat of an outsider from the traditional probate areas, I think is actually a virtue. I think that will assist in opening the courts up a bit to the light of day. I think that's actually, I kind of have a foot in the world and a foot outside of it, and I think that's a virtue. Thirdly, I would say my experience and demeanor. I have been a trial lawyer my whole career. I am a patient person. I am a level-headed, even-handed lawyer, I believe, and I think I can bring that those characteristics to the bench, and I think that distinguishes me somewhat from the other candidates insofar as my personality, I think, is suited to treating all parties fairly, and I have no inherent bias. And that's part of the outsider factor here. I'm not part of any particular group or clique within the probate bar. So I think that's the three things that allow me to stand out.
Okay, and lastly, could you please describe your political experience as well as experience as an election volunteer, staffer, candidate, or office holder, and any names and candidates that you may have worked for or volunteered?
Well, my conservative voting record goes back to my very first presidential election, the first time I could vote for president in 1996. And I can't tell you exactly why I became a Lamar Alexander supporter at the age of 20, but that's who I grafted onto in my first presidential election. My entire career virtually has been spent within the civil division of the DA's office. That is representing elected officials. That has made for some, I'm not going to say it's not uncomfortable positions, but we had to stay sort of apolitical because of our role. No matter who got elected district clerk, we were going to have to represent them. No matter who got elected county judge, we were going to have to represent them in commissioner's court. So my political activity has been more around who my boss was, an elected official, and then I was a Tom Wilder supporter, donated to him, but I have not been, I had always kept kind of the political activity at a bit of an arm's length given my position within the county and within the district attorney's office.
Okay, is anybody else?
Well, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Well, thank y'all very much. Yeah, thank y'all for, I don't know if y'all need, I see you got